Hello everyone, Gammon here, and I'm here to ease your worries. A lot of people seem worried and stressed out over bioware. They seem to think that because of bad financial performance and critical reception of recent bioware games, specifically Anthem, notorious serial killer and child molester EA is about to murder bioware and rape their childhood. Well, don't you worry about that. Everything is fine. Anthem's performance cannot possibly kill BioWare. EA already killed them like 10 years ago. And even if the studio stays open and churns out another Dragon Age game or whatever other franchise they decide to churn out in order to nickel and dime you, the BioWare you know and love has already ceased to exist. But what do we mean when we say BioWare? We're not talking about the development studio. What we're talking about are the creators of such games as Knights of the Old Republic, Baldur's Gate, Mass Effect 1 and 2, Jade Empire, Neverwinter Nights, and other great games. And these are the games that made people love BioWare. These are probably the games most people think about when they hear the name, or at least these are the games people positively think about when they hear the name. And the people who made these games, well, they don't work in BioWare anymore. And that's what killed them. That's why the studio is now a husk of its former self. Over the course of 10 years, BioWare has been bled out, and now all the talent is gone. And I want to address something before we continue into the trash fire that was BioWare's slow demise. Talent bleed wasn't the only problem. There were absolutely other problems. A fairly obvious one is the ramped up pace of game production. Now, there was a 2-year development cycle between Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3, and this alone can explain the bugs, the reused assets, and the unfinished concepts. An example for one unfinished concept we can see kinda remained inside the game is breakable glass. If you look, you'll see that there's a line there that states, "Some glass can be broken." This line is a big fat lie. This particular piece of glass is the only breakable glass in the entire game, and was most probably part of a system that just never got incorporated. Again, probably due to lack of time. And the same thing can be said about Dragon Age. BioWare were given 2 years to develop Dragon Age 2, and that's just not enough time, or at least doesn't seem to be enough time. And that easily explains the reuse of maps, the bugs, the horrible graphics, the overall unpolished experience. A lot of the problems in both of these games and a lot of other BioWare games can be explained simply with lack of time. However, this isn't an insurmountable problem, and I feel like a lot of the people who defend BioWare and believe it's still a good company kinda use this as a crutch. Mass Effect 2 had the same development time as Mass Effect 3, roughly 2 years, and in my opinion, it was the best game in the series. Dragon Age Inquisition had about the same amount of development time as Dragon Age 2. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the Dragon Age series, but almost everyone agrees Inquisition was far superior to 2. Another obvious problem is that the studio seems to have no strong leadership, leading to some horrible mismanagement of both money and time. The original founders of BioWare, Ray and Greg, left the studio in 2012, and their position was left vacant for roughly a year. And ever since then, and maybe even before then, the studio had a huge problem managing itself. This is evident by the near constant changes in its higher echelons. Most recent being Casey Hudson returning to the company after leaving it back in 2014, I believe, to take over as GM because Aaron Flynn decided it was his turn to leave BioWare. Now, the best example of mismanagement I can think of is BioWare's most recent game, Anthem. You can tell Anthem had a lot of money put into it just by looking at it. You can say whatever you want about the game, but it's pretty. And while they did have a 6-year development cycle, I will eat humanity's collective ass if they didn't have to reboot the game at least twice. There is no way in hell 6 years went into developing this game, and it still manages to hard crash PS4s, destroy their memory, and be balanced so poorly your starter weapon is literally the best weapon in the game. This game stinks of wasted time, wasted money, chasing trends instead of setting them, and that is usually caused by a very weak hand at the helm. However, even this isn't enough to explain all of the problems BioWare is currently facing. Let's take another mismanaged game from before Greg and Ray left, Star Wars The Old Republic. So, while it was a financial failure and it was clearly mismanaged, parts of the game still shone through. Specifically the story. Unfortunately, it wasn't able to support the game's weight. But still, despite of the mismanagement, you could still see the talent and the love that was put in there by the people who worked on the story. It's this potential, this hint of greatness, this unpolished gem in the rough that is absent, at least in my opinion, from BioWare's modern releases. And modern BioWare games missing that, missing the potential, that feeling of love, that feeling of talent in any aspect of their game, both gameplay and story, or even character design. That feeling that nobody cares or nobody actually knows what they're doing, at least again, in my opinion, can be explained away by mismanagement or short development cycles. I'm going to talk about two people who left BioWare. Now, the reason we'll be talking about them is to show you what it was that BioWare lost when those people left and how it affected the company, or at least how I think it affected the company. And by the end, hopefully you'll understand why I think that it was talent bleed that eventually killed BioWare. The first person we'll be talking about is Christina Norman. So anyone who played Mass Effect 2 should be aware of her name. Sadly, few are. She was the lead gameplay designer and responsible for one of my personal favorite video game classes, the Vanguard. The reason I love the Vanguard so much is that it's a hyper-mobile class. You can zip and zap around the battlefield in literally faster than the speed of light. You slam into enemies with massive force and then just blast them away with shotguns and submachine guns or your biotic powers. It's a really fun and very unique experience, and it's very different from almost every other cover shooter. As a Vanguard, you're given nothing but short-range weapons, and if you don't charge into the enemy and close the distance, you will not be accomplishing much. However, the Vanguard is not Superman. It's not bulletproof, and it can be killed. So if you charge into the wrong position, you charge into a place where you can't jump into cover, or you jump into a place where you're surrounded by enemies, you will die. It is genuinely one of my favorite classes, and hopefully I managed to explain why. It's because of the element of risk. It's because you absolutely have to charge, and you have to know where to charge, and mistakes will cost you. And this is just one class that was created for Mass Effect 2. And while none of the classes in Mass Effect 2 were perfect, none of them were broken either. About a year before Mass Effect 3 was released, Christina Norman resigned from BioWare due to personal reasons, and when it came out, her absence was felt. While it may seem like no drastic changes were made in the transition between Mass Effect 2 and 3, two additional tiers were added for each skill tree, giving each ability 2 new ranks, and a few new skills were added. On a subjective level, Nova specifically felt like it ruined what once was special about the Vanguard class, where you used to have to pick your targets, charge, and then run for cover or quickly finish them off before you charge to your next target. Now there is no more need to be map aware or to think tactically. You just charge in, Nova, and then charge again. The element of risk is gone, and so is the element of thinking about your next step, or even being aware of anyone around you. There is no more risk and reward. There's just reward. Mass Effect 3 also removed weapon limitations, so if you wanted to, you could equip a sniper rifle or an assault rifle on your Vanguard. This removed the urgency to charge. And in my opinion, it took what was unique and fun about the class and threw it out the fucking window. But these are subjective things. I think a lot of people who really enjoyed the class will, but that's just one man's opinion. However, if we are talking objectively, some of the abilities are fucking broken. Let's talk about Explosive Burst. Explosive Burst is the sixth ability in the Incendiary Ammo skill tree, and it's broken in two ways. The first way is it's extremely buggy. It's not meant to affect shields or barriers, but if you use a bionic power on an enemy, like say Warp, Incendiary Ammo will actually affect the shields. Because for some strange reason, Incendiary Ammo and Warp share their damage type. This completely removes the only weakness of the skill, its inability to harm heavily shielded enemies. The other way it's broken is balance. Let's pretend for a moment that Incendiary Ammo worked as intended. Even if we did ignore all the bugs, the skill would still be broken. And that's because, up to its 6th rank, Incendiary Ammo added damage based on whatever weapon you're using, up to a maximum of about 30%. So, let's say you have a weapon that does 100 damage a shot. If you use Incendiary Ammo, it will now do 130 damage a shot. If you have a weapon that deals 10 damage a shot, it will now deal 13 damage a shot. Pretty simple. However, this isn't the case with Explosive Burst. Explosive Burst gives you a 50% chance to do 100 extra damage per shot. So on average, you'll be doing 50 extra damage a shot. This means that if you're using a gun that used to deal 10 damage a shot, now on average, you'll be dealing 60 damage a shot in an AoE. This completely broke the game if you used any weapon with a high fire rate, any good assault rifle, any good submachine gun. Oh, and by the way, it completely removed your need to even get close to the enemy. You could literally just get an assault rifle and never leave cover. It also made the game trivially easy if you used the particle rifle. The particle rifle is the on-disc DLC weapon, and its fire rate is so ridiculously fast, it can trigger Explosive Burst multiple times a second. And you got that DLC weapon at the very start of the game. Another thing you could get right from the start of the game is Explosive Burst. You see, if you import your save file for Mass Effect 2, you're going to get a bunch of experience. And that experience is more than enough to get Explosive Shot as well as a bunch of other skills. This means you had the absolute best equipment at the very beginning of the game. Sounds familiar to anyone? And in Mass Effect 3, it was even worse than it is in Anthem, because in Mass Effect 3, it utterly trivialized the game. And the worst thing about this is it's not limited to the Vanguard. The Vanguard is the third most popular class, and it was picked by about 10% of the players. Another class that has incendiary ammo is the Soldier. The Soldier is the most popular class. It was picked by 65% of the players in Mass Effect 2 and 67% in Mass Effect 3. So an ability that completely trivializes the game and has incredibly broken interactions was allowed to exist on the most popular class. More people play this class than all the other classes combined. Not only do I not understand how this went through QA, it does not take a genius to see how an ability that gives you a flat amount of damage is going to be broken on any weapon with a high fire rate. This is an ability that should have never existed. It should never have even been suggested, and it exists on the most popular class. This is incredible incompetence. But whatever. So, now, okay, let's do a quick reality check. I'm not saying that the departure of Christina Norman exclusively caused these problems. I'm saying it most probably contributed to it, and that the state of Mass Effect 3 was probably at least part of the cause for her leaving BioWare. She did get married, she stated that was the reason, Personally, I have my doubts, but I can't prove it one way or the other. However, if she did leave BioWare because she was really unsatisfied with the state of the game she was working on, she wouldn't be the first. And we actually have one person who went on record stating this. His name was Brett Knowles. Brent was a gameplay designer, and he worked with BioWare for nearly 10 years before he left. The last game he worked on was Dragon Age. And Dragon Age wasn't the best game, but I quite liked it. And it did have a very good combat system. It was, well, classic BioWare. And Dragon Age 2 took a very different turn. They decided to go from the strategic role-playing game to basically a button masher. Now, Brett Knowles didn't like that very much, and when he saw the state the game was in and the direction it was taken, he left BioWare. So, like I said, if Christina Norman did decide to leave BioWare because she didn't like the state of the game, it wouldn't be the first time, and it probably won't be the last time either. Christina was a vital part of Mass Effect 2. Her leaving BioWare before Mass Effect 3 was finished probably contributed heavily to the horrible state of the gameplay, and her absence from future BioWare games caused, well, who knows what it caused? Who knows what the person who worked on one of my all-time favorite classes, the Vanguard, could have done if she worked on games like Andromeda or Anthem? Sadly, we'll never know that, and that's a real shame. But enough about Christina Norman. I think I've made myself clear about her. Let's move on to the next person I wanted to talk about, Drew Karpathian, who from this point on will only be called Drew, because honestly, fuck Poland. So what I want to explain is what BioWare lost when Drew left, and why he probably left. And this is going to be a bit of a familiar story. Drew has been working with BioWare since the old days of Baldur's Gate, joining the studio in 2000. He worked on 2 expansion packs for Baldur's Gate 2, Neverwinter Nights, Jade Empire, and was the lead writer of Mass Effect. If you enjoyed the universe of Mass Effect, this is the guy responsible. He basically had the entire universe inside his head, and sadly he never wrote it down. Which, by the way, is again huge management error. The fact that the lead designer could just have the universe inside of his head and never write it down in a Bible, calling it gross incompetence is probably an understatement. But, whatever, we'll put that aside for now. Drew was moved from the Mass Effect trilogy to work on Star Wars The Old Republic, and that probably contributed to its stellar story. After it flopped, Drew left BioWare. He did return to BioWare for a short period of time to work on Anthem, but he bounced right the fuck off of that game once he realized the state it was in, and left the company for a second time. The reason he was moved to Star Wars The Old Republic is because he was the head writer behind Knights of the Old Republic, which is considered by some to be the best Star Wars game ever made. These people clearly didn't play Knights of the Old Republic 2, but hey, I can't blame them. The game only became playable after a fan patched in the fucking ending. It's very obvious why EA wanted the man behind Knights of the Old Republic to work on what was, at the time, the most expensive game ever made, and their attempt to dethrone World of Warcraft. There are a lot of complaints about Star Wars The Old Republic. All of them are completely valid. But almost everyone agrees that the stories in the game are top-notch, and the same can be said about all the other games he worked on. However, the game's story just wasn't enough, and it flopped, both commercially and critically. Seeing the game he worked so hard on and the trilogy he started fail so spectacularly was probably quite hard on Drew, and possibly contributed to his decision to leave the company. What would Mass Effect 3 look like if he was allowed to stay as lead writer? What would Andromeda look like if he was there from the start? Or Anthem? Or any of the other BioWare games that he will no longer be working on? Again, just like Christina Norman, we'll never know. And just to be clear, the 2 or 3 people we just talked about leaving BioWare are not the reason it collapsed. The whole company was not kept afloat by the talent of a handful of people. They are examples of a much bigger trend. There's been a cavalcade of people slowly leaving the company and joining other studios for nearly a decade. And that's why modern BioWare is already dead. Because games are made by people, and when you lose the people that made your studio great, you can't be surprised when it starts churning out shit. At this point of the video, some of you are thinking, wow, Gammon, you lied to me. You said you're going to put my mind at ease and now I'm depressed. I'm just gonna dislike this video. Well, let me tell you right now, you should dislike this video. I'm shit at editing and my audio quality is horrible. But, but, this isn't a depressing video. Because here is the point that you should keep in your heart and why you should be optimistic for the future. While some of the people we talked about did decide to leave the gaming industry, a lot of them just migrated to other studios. They're still working, but now in an environment where their talent can be nurtured. So yes, EA killed BioWare, but they didn't manage to kill the people that worked for BioWare. At least not yet. Their master plan has yet to come to fruition. So hey, maybe follow up on them, see what they've been doing lately. Find out what you've been missing. Maybe some of the games they're working on has that same old BioWare charm you know and love. So don't worry, sit back and relax. BioWare can't be killed. It's already dead. But its legacy will live on. And that should be enough for now. Thanks for watching.